Okay.
All right, so Bob had called the plant engineer had called the plant manager. He had told us to wait right where we're at, and he had a cart that he used to drive around the plant with, or he would have other people use it to get stuff and organize people. Anyway, so he came by the engineering office. We both jumped on, and he headed towards the area where I worked. Well, he was going to drive it right into my boss's office. He forgot or didn't know that his cart was wider than the door into my boss's office, so he smashed the door jamb and everything in there. And I can remember, I jumped off, but I could see what was happening. And he was looking around, and he also told my boss, "You're fired, and I'm hiring him." So he came back and told me my boss had been fired, and that I was going to be promoted to take over the whole section. I said, "I'm not qualified to take over all those functions of metallurgy." I said, "Yeah, I could probably manage the people, but I have not a clue what jobs they do." He says, "Okay, I'll rehire him, and he's not to go in your section." Okay. But my boss ex-boss could not stay away from the trouble. So I had written a fairly significant long memo about, we had lots of metal that wasn't being treated properly, and it was rusting, and it was causing the corporation huge amounts of money for scrap. So I had suggested this study in treatment process to stop that. And my ex-boss, we used the same secretary, and that son of a bitch had gone in and gotten out my papers before she had typed it up. And he hid it. So after I had told people that I had already completed it, and it would be out in a day or two when the secretary got it done. So 3 or 4 days later, they wondered where it was. So I went and asked the secretary, and she looked for it, and she says, "I can't find it." That was the next thing on her list. Well, turns out my boss couldn't keep his fingers off. Ex-boss couldn't keep his fingers off it. So, here comes the cart. Jump on.
Hopefully not through the doorway this time.
But the doorway had been widened, so this time he could drive in. And he said, "You son of a bitch, I told you not to ever touch his stuff again. This time you're fired." Anyway, so that ended I stayed on, but I knew that my cranky old boss had some other people in the plant who would kill me with a lot of, 1,000 paper cuts, even though I had the tops on it. And then the plant manager bought Mack Truck Company, and he offered a job for me, but I'd have to move to Pennsylvania. Man, I was just out of high school, or seemed that way, just out of college. And prior to this, I had not had much of a social life, because I had had to work all the time as a kid, and in college to catch up to where I should have been. And so I wanted to enjoy some of money I was making. I made fairly decent money, and I developed a lot of friends, and I was not willing to give that up to move to Pennsylvania, where I would have been in great shape. I obviously could have made it, but anyway, I turned it down. Anyway, so I took a job with another small company. This was really small compared to what I was at, and we made chemical specialties for the automotive and truck industries, like engine paints and degreasers and polishes for the exterior, and rust removers and all kinds of things like that. Well, turns out that my boss at this company was black. And so I went, he wanted to interview me also. So I went in for an interview with him, and we chatted, and he seemed like a pretty nice fellow. So he asked why I was willing to work for black. And I said, I thought I hired for a job. I don't care what color people are. And he laughed, and he said, "You're hired." Permanently. So we got along magnificent. And it turns out he was one of the more brilliant people I've known. And I learned from him that blacks have a way of, at least in bright ones, of how to pick people. So they know whether they're amenable to decent social relationships or not. And they can tell very quickly whether you're an old racist or you're a potential friend. And we just developed great close friendship. So during the 60s, after John Kennedy was elected president, I'd say that was 1960. I had started working at Rio in 61. So we're talking about 1963 when race relations were really heated up, and we were pressing for civil rights and voting rights, those kind of things. And integration of the schools. So they were talking about busing and spreading students around. So they would be, the blacks had typically been sent to the poorest buildings with probably the youngest teachers or the most regressive teachers also. And so the school district and the political system in the city was quite progressive people. And they wanted to integrate and really improve the standards of most of the black kids. Well, my boss had graduated from one of the outstanding black colleges in Ohio. And being very bright, not only that, he had a great sense of humor. So when we were together and alone, out of the ear range of people we didn't know, then we could talk and shoot the shit and tell stories and jokes like anybody else. At any rate, there were marches going on. And so, yeah, I agreed to go marching in favor of the civil rights in Lansing. And there were quite a few whites, and quite a few of the local politicians. So I'd gotten to meet a lot of the upper level politicians and their staffs, and and state representatives and their staffs. And, we had maybe 5,000 people out marching down the Main Street. It was a pretty good sized crowd. So we felt secure. Not totally secure, because there's always, as today, there can be some idiot gunman or rock throwers or whatever. So I was involved in the early civil rights movement, and I felt so good about President Kennedy, who really began, when he began to understand the problem of the country, he moved quickly, and it affected historically mostly the South, which was by far the worst. There were still lynchings and a lot of killings going on. That wasn't the case in Michigan, but that didn't mean that we were anywhere near equal rights. And I thought it should be equal rights for everybody, and especially voting rights. They had voting rights in Michigan. That was not a discrimination. But we had to set a better example for the country. And so that was my involvement. I could go on and bore you.
Well, thank you very much for doing this.
Well, you're welcome.
I thought
I
all
couldn't
that.
do it for a better kid.
Well, I try. I thought all of the stories were interesting.